What makes urban legends so intriguing? Is it the chilling thought that some of these tales might be true? Or is it the way they tap into our most primal fears of the dark, the unseen, and the things that lurk just beyond our understanding? Urban legends have been passed down for generations, evolving with each retelling. They exploit our fears of the supernatural, the unknown, and the sinister forces that may exist in the shadows. In this story, we will explore some of the most disturbing urban legends, each with its own eerie twist. But be warned, sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that feel just real enough to be possible. Kevin had heard the stories before of drivers who picked up hitchhikers, only for them to vanish without a trace. He never believed them. Until one stormy night when he spotted a young woman standing by the roadside, shivering in the rain. Feeling sorry for her, he pulled over and offered a ride. She climbed in, her soaked dress clinging to her skin. She barely spoke, only giving him an address a few miles away. Her voice was soft, distant, like a whisper carried by the wind. Kevin kept glancing at her through the rearview mirror. But every time he did, she seemed less there. Like the shadows were swallowing her piece by piece. When he arrived at the address, he turned to tell her they had reached their destination, but she was gone. The seat was completely dry. He felt his stomach drop. Had he imagined it? Shaken, Kevin knocked on the door of the house. An old woman answered. When he described the hitchhiker, her face paled. "That's my daughter," she whispered. "But she died in an accident 10 years ago, right on that road." She showed him a faded photograph, and his blood ran cold. It was her. The next morning, Kevin returned to the road where he had picked her up. There, on the side of the road, lay an old, tattered scarf, the same one she had been wearing. Tom was locking up his store late one evening when he heard a knock at the door. Two children stood outside, their faces obscured by shadows. "Can we come in?" one of them asked in a flat, emotionless voice. Something about them felt off. As they stepped closer, the dim light revealed their faces. Their eyes were pure black, no whites, no irises, just endless darkness. Fear gripped Tom's chest. Every instinct told him not to let them in. He slammed the door and turned off the lights. When he peeked outside minutes later, they were gone. But that night, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't really gone. He heard soft knocking at his window, followed by whispering voices just beyond the glass. "Let us in. We won't hurt you." The whispers grew louder, more insistent, until finally they stopped. The next day, he told his friend about the encounter, only to be met with a pale, horrified expression. "You saw them," his friend said. "The black-eyed children. If you let them in, bad things happen." Tom never saw them again. But later that week, his store was broken into. His car mysteriously stopped working on the highway, and a close relative fell seriously ill. Whether coincidence or something more sinister, he never stopped wondering if he had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. Mia was babysitting for a wealthy family in an old Victorian house. The kids were asleep upstairs, and she was watching TV when the phone rang. "Have you checked on the children?" a raspy voice asked. Her stomach tightened. She hung up, assuming it was a prank, but the calls kept coming. Finally, she phoned the police. Moments later, the operator's voice was urgent. "Get out of the house. Now." "The calls are coming from inside." Mia bolted outside just as the police arrived. Inside, they found a man hiding in the attic, a knife in his hand. He had been watching her the whole time. If she had waited a moment longer, she might not have lived to tell the tale. Years later, Mia still had nightmares about that night. The police told her that the man had been there for days, watching, waiting. They found old food wrappers and notes scribbled in the walls. Some of the notes contained her name. Some had times written down, likely marking when she had entered different rooms. One simply read, "Almost ready." Mark was driving home late at night on a long, desolate highway. The road stretched for miles with no signs of life, except for the occasional street light flickering in the distance. He turned up the radio to drown out the silence, but an uneasy feeling settled in his chest. It felt like someone was watching him. Glancing in his rearview mirror, he froze. A shadowy figure was sitting in his back seat. His heart pounded. He had locked the doors, hadn't he? He dared not look directly, but in his peripheral vision, he could see it shifting, almost as if it were breathing. Mark gripped the steering wheel, his hands slick with sweat. With every mile, the presence seemed to grow heavier, the air colder. Summoning his courage, he slammed on the brakes, hoping to throw whatever it was forward. But when he turned around, the back seat was empty. Shaken, he sped the rest of the way home, heart racing. When he pulled into his driveway, he sat still for a moment, trying to steady his breath. Then, just as he reached to open the door, he felt a cold breath against his ear and a whisper that sent ice through his veins. "You should have kept driving." Mark never took that road again. Urban legends are terrifying because they blur the line between fiction and reality. Could the shadow passenger be hiding in the back seat of someone's car tonight? Do the black-eyed children truly exist? Perhaps these are just stories, or perhaps they are warnings. Sleep well, and keep the lights on. Let me know if you need any more tweaks. Sleep paralysis is a terrifying phenomenon. A moment when you wake up, fully aware, but unable to move. Some see shadows lurking in the corners of their rooms, others hear whispers in their ears. But in the quiet town of Black Hollow, sleep paralysis isn't just a nightmare, it's a curse that has haunted its residents for centuries. Black Hollow was founded in the late 1600s by a group of settlers fleeing accusations of witchcraft. They sought refuge in a dense forest, far from the prying eyes of the world. But the land they claimed had its own history, one that should never have been disturbed. Old legends spoke of the silent watchers, shadow-like entities that roamed the forest long before humans arrived. They were neither spirits nor demons, but something far worse, ancient beings that fed on the fear of the living. The settlers ignored the warnings of the indigenous tribes and built their town anyway. For years, things seemed normal. But then the first reports came, people waking up in the dead of night, unable to move, feeling the weight of something unseen pressing down on their chests. The victims spoke of tall, faceless figures watching them, their hollow eyes burning with malevolent hunger. Some were left with deep scratches on their skin. Others disappeared entirely, only to be found days later with their mouths stretched wide in silent, eternal screams. By the 1800s, Black Hollow had become infamous. People suffered from sleep paralysis in numbers unheard of anywhere else. Entire families vanished overnight. The town elders knew the truth but buried it deep within the town records. Hidden away in the church's basement were journals from the original settlers, describing an old ritual meant to keep the watchers at bay. Each year, on the longest night, a chosen individual had to be taken into the woods, bound in a circle of salt, and left there until dawn. The watchers would feast on their fear, sparing the rest of the town. No one ever saw the sacrifice again, but it worked. Until it didn't. In 1963, a young doctor named Elliot Crane moved to Black Hollow, intrigued by the town's disturbing history of sleep disorders. He dismissed the stories as mass hysteria, convinced that sleep paralysis was merely a neurological phenomenon. That changed when he experienced it himself. One night, he woke to an unbearable weight on his chest. His limbs were frozen, his mouth unable to scream. At the foot of his bed stood a towering figure, its form shifting like smoke. It had no face, but Elliot felt it watching him. Then it moved closer, its breath ice cold against his skin. He broke free just as dawn's light seeped through his window. But something was wrong. His reflection in the mirror showed hand-shaped bruises on his arms, as though something had gripped him tightly. That morning, he found his neighbor, Mr. Wilkins, dead in his bed, eyes wide with terror, mouth open in a frozen scream. Elliot became obsessed with the town's history, searching the archives until he found the records of the ritual. The sacrifices had stopped in 1947, after the town council decided it was barbaric. That was when the nightmares worsened, when more people started vanishing. Determined to uncover the truth, Elliot sought out the last living elder, Agnes Whitmore, a frail woman in her 90s. She refused to speak at first, but after much pleading, she finally whispered the chilling words. "They've been waiting, Doctor." The watchers never left. The sacrifices stopped, but their hunger never did. And now they're taking what they're owed. That night, Elliot set up cameras in his bedroom. He forced himself to stay awake, but exhaustion took him. The footage he captured was beyond comprehension. At precisely 3:07 a.m., his body lifted off the bed, as if invisible hands were dragging him upward. His mouth opened in a silent scream as dark figures surrounded him. The video ended abruptly. The next morning, his bed was empty. The only sign that he had ever been there was the deep, burned outline of a human figure on his mattress, as if his body had been incinerated from within. After Elliot's disappearance, Black Hollow descended into madness. More people reported waking up to find shadowy figures standing over them. Some awoke with scratches and bruises. Others never woke up at all. The town council, desperate and terrified, tried to reinstate the old ritual, but it was too late. The watchers were no longer satisfied with one sacrifice. They wanted them all. By 1980, Black Hollow was abandoned, its streets empty, its houses left to decay. The few survivors who escaped refused to speak of what they saw, only warning others never to stay overnight. To this day, travelers who pass through report strange occurrences, unseen hands brushing against them, whispers in the wind, and the overwhelming sense of being watched. So if you ever find yourself near the ruins of Black Hollow, whatever you do, don't fall asleep. Because if you do, the watchers will be waiting just beyond the edge of your vision, ready to claim you for their own. And once they have you, they never let go. The old bell tower of Street, Augustine Church, rang ominously as the wind howled through the trees. The sky was overcast, the clouds thick and heavy, promising rain. It was supposed to be a perfect day, a celebration of love, but an eerie stillness hung in the air, an unshakable sense of foreboding. Daniel stood at the altar, his hands clammy, his heart pounding not from nerves but from an unexplainable dread that had gripped him. The moment he stepped into the church, he had been waiting for this day for so long. The guests whispered among themselves as the doors creaked open. A hush fell over the church. There she was, Evelyn, dressed in an immaculate white gown, her veil flowing behind her like a ghostly mist. The candle flames flickered violently as if protesting her presence. The air grew thick, suffocating, yet Daniel couldn't tear his eyes away from her. She walked slowly, unnaturally so, as if she were gliding rather than stepping. Her face remained hidden behind the veil. With every step she took, the church seemed to darken. The stained glass windows, once vibrant, dimmed into dull, lifeless colors. When Evelyn finally stood before Daniel, the priest cleared his throat uneasily, wiping sweat from his brow. "We are gathered here today." His voice trembled, the words barely audible over the deafening silence. Daniel reached out to lift Evelyn's veil, his fingers trembling. As he did, the church doors slammed shut with a force that sent a gust of wind rushing through the aisles. The candles blew out. A single streak of lightning illuminated the church, and Evelyn's face was revealed. A collective gasp erupted from the guests. Daniel stumbled back, his breath caught in his throat. The woman before him was not the Evelyn he knew. Her once beautiful face was now a grotesque mask of decay, her skin cracked and peeling, her lips blackened, her eyes hollow sockets that leaked thick, inky tears. Her mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, revealing rows of jagged, yellowed teeth. Daniel tried to scream, but no sound came out. His body was frozen, locked in place by an invisible force. Evelyn, or the thing wearing her form, tilted her head, her skeletal fingers reaching out to touch his face. "My love," she crooned, her voice a chilling whisper. "I waited for you." The air grew impossibly cold, breath misting in the eerie silence. The guests began to back away, their faces pale with terror. Some bolted for the doors, but they would not open. The windows remained sealed. They were trapped. The priest clutched his crucifix, his voice cracking as he recited prayers. But Evelyn only laughed, the sound distorted and unnatural. The church began to tremble. The floorboards creaked and split open, revealing an abyss of darkness beneath. Daniel, tears streaming down his face, shook his head violently. "Evelyn, this isn't real! You..." She stepped closer, her icy fingers trailing down his cheek. "Do you not remember our promise?" Memories flooded Daniel's mind. A dream, no. A nightmare he had long forgotten. A night spent in a derelict mansion, where Evelyn had dared him to prove his love. A ceremony whispered in the dark, vows exchanged beneath the gaze of something unseen. He had laughed then, thinking it was just a game. But now, standing before her, the realization clawed at him. It had not been a game. "You promised me forever," she hissed. The church groaned as the shadows lengthened, twisting into clawed hands that reached for the guests, pulling them into the darkness. Screams echoed, but Evelyn's gaze never left Daniel's. He tried to run, but the ground beneath him crumbled, pulling him down into the abyss with her. The doors burst open as the storm raged outside. By the time the villagers arrived, the church was empty. No guests, no priest, no bride or groom, only the flickering candlelight and the faint scent of decay lingering in the air. And on the altar, a single wedding band lay, rusted and covered in dust. Dense forests and rolling mist. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were rare, and life unfolded in a predictable rhythm. But for the last 2 months, something had changed. It started with one missing person. Mary Thompson, a school teacher, vanished without a trace. At first, it was shrugged off as a disappearance. Maybe she'd left for a new life, or perhaps it was some sort of accident. But then, one by one, the wives of Pine Hollow began to disappear. Annabelle, the baker's wife Clara, the doctor's wife Elizabeth, who ran the local store. They were all gone, without a single clue, without a sound. The husbands were frantic, each of them trying to make sense of what was happening. The town sheriff, Henry Calloway, launched investigation after investigation, but nothing came up. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no trace of any kind. It was as if they had simply vanished into thin air. The only common thread? All the missing women were married. As the weeks passed, the town grew more and more unsettled. People began to whisper about the disappearances, some of them speculating that there was something sinister behind it. But no one dared to voice their thoughts too loudly. One evening, after yet another fruitless search, Sheriff Calloway sat alone in his office, running over the same evidence in his head. He had interviewed every husband, every neighbor, every friend, but still, there was nothing. It was as if the women had just disappeared from existence. His mind wandered, and then it hit him. There was one person he hadn't questioned. The one person who seemed too calm in the face of so much chaos. Arthur Green. Green was new to town, having moved there just before the first disappearance. He was a quiet man, a writer, who lived on the outskirts of town. And strangely, he was never seen with his wife Margaret. The few times the two had been seen together, there was an odd tension, a coldness between them that no one could explain. Sheriff Calloway decided to pay Arthur a visit. He drove down the winding road that led to Green's secluded house, the headlights of his car cutting through the thick fog that seemed to always cling to the land. As he arrived at the house, he noticed something strange. There were no lights on, no signs of life at all. It was eerily quiet. The door creaked open with a single push, as if it had been waiting for him. Inside, the house was dark, with only the faint glow of moonlight streaming through the windows. There was an odd, pungent smell in the air, something that reminded Calloway of old paper and something more. Something wrong. He made his way through the hallway and into the living room. The air was thick with dust, but there, in the corner of the room, was a large bookshelf. Calloway walked toward it, drawn to it inexplicably. He reached out and pulled the nearest book from the shelf. It fell open in his hands, but it wasn't a regular book. It was a journal, its pages filled with strange, cryptic writing, almost as if written in a hurry. Some of the entries were dated, others were not, but one thing was clear. The writing was about the women of Pine Hollow. The pages told a chilling tale. Arthur Green had been a part of a long-forgotten ritual, one that promised to keep his wife forever young, forever his. The ritual, however, required a sacrifice, a soul, and the women of Pine Hollow were chosen. He had taken them one by one, using their love for their husbands to bind them to him. Each woman, it seemed, had been brought to this house, never to return. Their lives were the price to ensure that his own life, his own marriage, remained undisturbed. As Calloway read, he felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. The last entry was dated just a few days ago. The final one will be soon. Once she is mine, I will be free from this curse. Margaret will be mine again, and I will live forever. Before Calloway could comprehend the gravity of what he was reading, he heard a noise behind him, the creaking of footsteps. Slowly, he turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was Arthur Green. But his eyes, they were not the eyes of the man Calloway had seen around town. They were empty, hollow, as though all warmth and life had been drained from them. "You shouldn't have come here, Sheriff," Green said, his voice cold and detached. Calloway's hand instinctively reached for his gun, but it was too late. Green stepped forward, and with each step the air grew heavier, suffocating, as if the very house itself was alive, aware and hungry. A sudden realization hit Calloway. He wasn't just facing a man. He was facing something ancient, something evil. Green had never been human. He was something else. Something that had been hiding in plain sight, feeding off the love and lives of those around him. With one final step, Green lunged at the sheriff, his hand gripping Calloway's throat with an unnatural strength. In his last moments, Calloway's eyes widened as he saw, just behind Green, a pale, lifeless figure. Margaret. She stood silently, watching her husband's work unfold. The next morning, the entire town of Pine Hollow woke to the news. Sheriff Calloway was missing, and the women, they were gone, as if they had never existed. The only trace left behind was the haunting journal, found lying open on the floor, the last entry still visible. "Once she is mine, I will live forever." Pine Hollow was never the same. The men who had once searched for their wives, desperate and broken, now went about their lives as if nothing had changed. The wives had never truly existed, and neither did the search for them. The town had fallen under an unspoken spell, and life in Pine Hollow went on, forever changed, forever dark. And in the shadows of the house on the hill, Arthur Green smiled, his marriage complete once again. The old theater on Blackwood Street had been closed for years, a relic of the past. Its boarded-up doors and shattered windows whispered of a time long forgotten. But for Daniel Carter, a freelance film archivist, it was the perfect place to hunt for lost footage, old reels of forgotten cinema, that collectors would pay fortunes for. Daniel had heard the rumors, whispers of an infamous lost reel, a film so disturbing it was banned before its premiere. Some claimed it was cursed, that anyone who watched it either disappeared or lost their minds. Of course, Daniel dismissed these as urban legends, the kind of nonsense that made collectors more desperate to find it. And so, when an anonymous tip led him to the Blackwood Theater, he didn't hesitate. He broke in through a side door, stepping into the stale, dust-laden air. His flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing rows of tattered seats and a screen rotting in its frame. Behind the auditorium, he found the film archive room, its door hanging ajar as if inviting him in. Inside, metal shelves stretched into the shadows, holding hundreds of film canisters. Most were labeled with dates from the 40s and 50s, but one sat alone on the highest shelf, unlabeled, its tin rusted at the edges. Daniel reached for it, his fingers tingling as they touched the cold metal. He pried it open, revealing a single reel of film. No markings, no title. His heartbeat quickened. Could this be it? The lost reel? His hands trembled with excitement as he grabbed the reel and rushed to the projection room. He had to see what was on it. The projector sputtered to life, casting flickering light onto the screen. The film began in silence. A black and white shot of a dimly lit room appeared, grainy and aged. A chair sat in the center, empty. Then, without warning, a figure stepped into frame, a woman in a hospital gown, her back turned to the camera. She twitched unnaturally, her limbs jerking as though she were a marionette held by unseen strings. The sound kicked in distorted whispers layered over a droning hum. Daniel's skin prickled. He leaned forward, eyes locked onto the screen. The woman's head twisted slowly, cracking bones echoing through the empty theater. When her face became visible, his stomach lurched. Her eyes were hollow pits, blacker than the void, and her mouth was unnaturally wide, stretching as if screaming, yet no sound came from her lips. Instead, the whispers grew louder, overlapping, speaking in a language Daniel couldn't understand. The film jumped, cutting erratically between frames. Each flash revealed something worse, bodies writhing in the darkness, hands pressed against the screen as though they were trying to escape. The chair in the center of the room was no longer empty. A figure sat in it now, a man, bound and gagged, his head lolling forward. The woman turned to him, her movements sharp and erratic. The whispers ceased, replaced by a single phrase spoken in a voice that didn't sound human. "Watch closely." Daniel's breath hitched. He wanted to stop the film, but his body refused to move. On screen, the woman reached out, fingers elongating into shadowy tendrils that wrapped around the man's skull. He convulsed violently, veins bulging beneath his skin. His eyes rolled back, and then the screen went black. Daniel gasped, his body breaking free from its paralysis. He scrambled to shut off the projector, but it kept running. The screen flickered back to life, showing the theater itself. His theater, the seats, the screen, the room he was sitting in, only now he wasn't alone. A shadowy figure stood in the back row. His flashlight flickered, his pulse hammered in his ears. He turned, heart pounding, but the theater was empty. When he faced the screen again, the figure had moved closer. 3 rows away now, its head tilted slightly, as if studying him. The whispers returned, now surrounding him, crawling under his skin. He gripped the arms of his seat, unable to tear his eyes from the screen. The film crackled, the picture distorting. The woman was back, standing directly in front of the camera. She slowly raised her arm and pointed. Directly at him. Daniel felt something brush against the back of his neck. He spun around, swinging the flashlight wildly. Nothing. Just empty air. His breath came in ragged gasps as he turned back to the screen. The woman was gone. The chair in the center of the room was empty again. Except Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His hands began to tremble as he realized what he was seeing. He was now the one sitting in the chair. The whispers surged, turning into screams. The shadowy figure in the theater lunged forward, and Daniel finally found his voice, letting out a ragged, terrified scream. The screen went black. The reel spun to its end. Silence fell over the theater, and Daniel Carter was never seen again. It was supposed to be a weekend getaway and escape from the constant noise of the city. Mark, his girlfriend Sarah, and their two friends, Josh and Emily, had planned the trip for weeks. A remote cabin deep in the Montana wilderness, surrounded by towering pines and a winding river, promised peace, adventure, and solitude. They arrived just before sunset. The cabin was old but sturdy, with a stone fireplace and wooden beams darkened by time. A single lantern swung from the porch, casting elongated shadows across the clearing. The nearest town was a 2-hour drive away, and there was no cell service. That was part of the appeal, disconnecting from the world. The first night passed without issue. They drank, laughed, and shared stories by the fire. The only sounds were the crackling wood and the distant hoot of an owl. It wasn't until the second day that things began to feel off. Mark woke early to go fishing at the river. The morning air was crisp, and mist hovered over the water. He cast his line and settled in. After a while, he noticed something strange. There were no birds. The forest, usually alive with chirping and rustling, was silent. A branch snapped behind him. He turned quickly, expecting to see Josh or Sarah, but the tree line was empty. Brushing it off as an animal, he continued fishing. Minutes later, a low, distant whistle echoed through the trees. It wasn't the wind. It was deliberate, slow, drawn out. Someone was out there. Mark packed up and hurried back to the cabin. He didn't mention the whistle, not wanting to worry the others. By the afternoon, Sarah and Emily had gone hiking, while Josh stayed back to chop firewood. Mark took the chance to explore the surroundings alone, trying to shake his unease. He found something about a mile from the cabin, a tattered blue tent, partially collapsed. It looked abandoned, the fabric torn as if by claws or a knife. A rusted lantern lay on its side, and inside, Mark found a backpack filled with rotting food, an old map, and a blood-stained jacket. His stomach twisted. He grabbed the map, recognizing the cabin's location circled in red. Someone had been watching them. A sound behind him. He spun around. Nothing, just trees. Mark ran back to the cabin, this time telling Josh what he had found. They decided not to tell the girls, at least not yet, but that night they locked the doors and kept the fire burning. Sometime past midnight, Mark woke to the sound of footsteps outside the cabin. Slow, heavy. He nudged Josh awake. They listened, holding their breath. Then, a long, guttural howl split the night. Not a wolf, not a coyote. It was human, twisted, agonized, like someone screaming through clenched teeth. The footsteps retreated into the trees. Mark gripped the hunting knife they had brought. "We're leaving first thing in the morning." They packed up at dawn, shoving their gear into the truck. The forest felt wrong, like it was holding its breath. The moment they turned onto the dirt road, Sarah screamed. A man stood at the edge of the trees, gaunt, with wild eyes and a tangled beard. His clothes were in tatters, his skin smeared with filth. He didn't move, just stared as they passed. The truck hit a pothole and lurched. When Mark looked back, the man was gone. They drove in silence until they reached the main road. Only then did they let out the breath. They didn't realize they were holding the news. A week later, Mark couldn't shake the feeling. He searched online for missing persons near Black Hollow. Buried in old reports, he found that 3 hikers had disappeared in the area last year. Only one body had been found, half buried near the river. Cause of death, unknown. A final chill ran through him as he read the last line of the report. Unidentified human bite marks were found on the remains.